Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell.
And good evening, everyone. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And William Bell landed back in Memphis a very, very short time ago. I don't even know if he's made it back to his house or not, to be honest about it. But he has been in Ghana, West Africa, for a week, helping establish 2 churches over there, teaching the gospel, helping them get fully established, trying to make the future sure and solid and sound for the work of the Lord there in that region. As I have mentioned before, it is absolutely thrilling beyond words to know of the work that William is involved in over there, how effective the work is going. He has been working with Solomon Baidu over there, who is a native, who is a local minister. He's a relatively young man, but according to William, he's very, very sharp. He's very effective. They have been doing a fantastic job planting those churches, of getting those churches established. And William has been there really to try to just give a little bit of guidance to the work that's already been established and has been doing quite well, and offering some help that perhaps they could not do on their own over there. And so I tell you, it's just absolutely thrilling to know of what William has been involved in and what he is involved in. And I want you to keep William, and I want you to keep that work in your prayers, that it will continue to proceed, that it will continue to grow, that it will continue to prosper as a work of the Lord over there in spreading the borders, spreading the boundaries of the kingdom, and sharing with those people the wonderful word of fulfillment, because it's so important that people understand that we serve a God who keeps his promises. We do not serve a God that has failed. We do not serve a God that has postponed his promises. We do not serve a God that has altered his promises in any way. God set the time for his work. He kept his word on time. And that is such a marvelous, marvelous message that we preach, that William and I try to bring to you every single week here on Two Guys and a Bible, here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And, you know, as a further note, just to share with you a little bit more, and we always like to do this at the beginning of each of our programs, to share just a little bit of what's going on, the emails that we receive, the correspondence that we are involved with from people literally around the world who are coming to a knowledge of the truth. And, you know, just this week, on Monday and today, this morning, I had 2 videos on YouTube on the coronavirus, this horrible virus that's sweeping around the world. And I have to tell you, I was more than a little concerned as to whether or not William would get stuck in Ghana. I contacted earlier in the day Solomon Baidu and asked him, because I had sent William no less than 4, perhaps 5 text messages on the cell phone, had not heard a word from him. And so I'm thinking, uh-oh. And, of course, I knew that the phone service over there was not good at all. And so I thought, well, he's in an isolated area perhaps. The phone service is not working. Okay, that's why he has not contacted and not responded to my text messages. Well, I finally got on the internet today, and I sent Solomon Baidu a private message. And I said, can you tell me what's the status with William? And amazingly enough, he was evidently at the computer. And so he responded very expeditiously. And he told me that William was supposed to have left yesterday for France and then to get home today. Well, you know, France has been experiencing just a pretty severe case of the coronavirus. And I'm thinking, president has restricted flights from overseas. Can William Bell even get home? Is he going to be stuck in the airport at Paris, France? Now, mind you, there are worse places in the world to be stuck. I can testify to that. The Paris airport, although is to me it's an amazingly confusing airport hub. I didn't enjoy it when I was there, but it's beautiful surroundings. So again, there are worse places in the world to be stuck. And so, lo and behold, I get this text message from William responding to one of my earlier text messages. And I asked him in response, I said, are you back in the States? Well, I didn't hear anything. And finally, I get a text message that says, we just landed. And so that was a huge relief to know that William has made it back to the good old U.S. of A. He's not stuck in Africa. He's not stuck in France. He's back home. I know that's got to be a tremendous, tremendous relief to him as well. We hope and trust that everything is okay back in Memphis, as we certainly hope and pray that it is. So we're waiting to hear from him. I'm pretty sure, and I can attest to this, I'm pretty sure that it's going to take him a good little bit to recover from the flight. That jet lag is very real. It's very bad. It's awful. And so I suspect that here, if he's not already in bed sleeping, trying to get caught up, he'll be headed that way very, very shortly. Because that, like I said, jet lag is just pretty horrible. They're flying from a place like France, Great Britain, or whatever. But anyway, we can't wait to hear from William to give us a full report on his trip to Ghana to see if everything went as he hoped it would. He had a lot planned to try to pack into just about a week of work over there. I'm not going to divulge what they were involved in trying to get accomplished. We'll leave that to William for next week. And I look forward to William being back on the program with us next week and giving us a very full and detailed report on how this trip to Ghana went. And in the meantime, as I mentioned, let's see, this is Tuesday, and on Sunday I received an email. I received an email from this individual who told me that they could not afford to purchase my books, but they would love to have a few of them. And so I sent them the last days identified and 2 Peter chapter 3, the elements shall melt with fervent heat. And I asked this individual to tell me more about themselves. Well, it turns out that they live in the Netherlands. The individual is himself a theologian. He has a PhD. Now, to be really honest, I find it a little difficult to believe a man that has a theological advanced degree couldn't afford a little bit for the books, but that's okay. And he told me a little bit about himself, that he had come out of the dispensational world and that he had discovered the YouTube videos, and he's now writing a book on eschatology. and that he wanted access to my books to be able to cite them in his book on eschatology. Now, that's more than a little exciting that he's a theologian writing a book on eschatology. He never told me that he is a full preterist. He did say, however, that he is absolutely convinced that the entirety of the Olivet Discourse does refer to AD 70. Well, I can tell you, in my personal opinion, my personal view, you cannot take the position that the entirety of the Olivet Discourse is referent to AD 70, the Lord's coming at that time, which means that was the time of the resurrection. You cannot take that position and maintain a futurist eschatology of any kind. I hope, folks, if you're listening in this evening, I hope that you will be sure to listen to my YouTube video that will be aired tomorrow. It is showing the relationship between Isaiah 27:13 and Matthew chapter 24 and verse 31, proving. And let me give just a little bit of a backstory, a little bit of a caveat, perhaps. When I was growing up in the fellowship of the Churches of Christ, the general widespread consensus belief was and is, it still is, that the Olivet Discourse is divided into two different subjects. Verses 4 to 35 was a prediction of the Lord's coming, yes, the Lord's coming, a spiritual coming, against Jerusalem in AD 70. It was recognized that the language of the sun being darkened, the moon being turned to blood, the stars falling from heaven, the coming of the Son of Man on the cloud of our great Lord, directly from the Old Covenant prophets, and those Old Covenant prophets never used that language literally to speak of physical events, that is to say, a physical coming of the Lord on the clouds of heaven with a literal trumpet, etc. But in verse 36, it was believed that the Lord changed the subject. Now, in verse 36 and following, he's talking about his real coming and the end of the age. And by that end of the age, it was meant the end of the current Christian age. Now, again, I believe that. I taught that for a good long while of my life until I actually studied the text for myself, and I discovered that that's simply not a tenable. That is to say, it's not a defensible position. It is, in fact, a false view. And so when I discovered that Matthew chapter 24 and 25 are predictive strictly of first century events, that needless to say, that rattled my cage. It changed my entire paradigm. And I came to understand how pervasive the Olivet Discourse is in the rest of the New Testament, particularly Paul's view of eschatology in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. In fact, in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, I adduce 22, let me say that again, 22 direct parallels between the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24 and 25, and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And I demonstrate that the direct parallels from Matthew 24 and 25, they don't come from simply one section, i.e. verse 4 to 35, verses 36 and following. They are, as it were, haphazard. And I don't mean coincidental, and I don't mean haphazard in some kind of an accidental way. What I mean is that the entire narrative of Matthew 24 and 25, written as a literary unit and not a divided discourse, Paul draws from both of those so-called sections, and he does so without any indication whatsoever of saying, well, now look, I'm drawing from the very first part of the Olivet Discourse. That refers to what's about to come. And now let me talk about the end of time. Absolutely no indication of any kind of dichotomization of the Olivet Discourse. And so when this gentleman from the Netherlands told me in the email today that he had come to the conclusion that the Olivet Discourse, the entirety of it, is speaking of the events of the first century and the Lord's coming in AD 70. Even though he did not say to me that he is a full preterist, my thinking was, you can't do that. Now, I'm well aware of the fact that Kenneth Gentry, who has been challenged to debate me more times than I can count, almost. That's a little bit of hyperbole, but he's been challenged at least 15 times to meet me in formal public debate, and he's always just a little bit too busy, always. But Kenneth Gentry is on record as saying, first of all, that the Olivet Discourse is divided, just like those in my former fellowship of the Churches of Christ have and do teach. But then over the last few years, Kenneth Gentry has actually gone on record as saying there are many reputable scholars who believe that the entirety of the Olivet Discourse referred to the events leading up to the Lord's coming in AD 70. And he said, even though he did not fully espouse that view, it would not disturb him and it would not impact his futurist eschatology, even if he admitted that were true. Well, I got news for Mr. Gentry. That is absolutely an indefensible position. You cannot admit that the entirety of the Olivet Discourse was fulfilled by AD 70 and maintain a futurist eschatology. Sorry, you just can't do it. And I'd be more than happy to meet Mr. Gentry in formal public debate, debating that very issue, were he to choose and finally admit or agree to meet formal debate. So anyway, this gentleman in the Netherlands has set himself on a course to write now on eschatology, understanding and realizing that the entirety of the Olivet Discourse is one subject. And again, he has come to those views partly as a result of our YouTube videos. We're thankful for that. It's a very humbling thing to realize that our message is reaching completely around the world, just like I know William has said. It's very humbling to realize that sitting in Memphis, Tennessee, with a ministry entitled All Things Fulfilled, and to be able to reach to the other side of the world and Ghana in Africa, and to know that he had the opportunity to go there and touch who knows how many lives, to change their lives, to bring them to the position of understanding the glorious message of fulfillment. Look, we've said on this program many, many, many times, we are living in absolutely fantastic and exciting. I don't know how much more exciting it could be when both William and I, and look, there are many, many, many others out there on the firing line that I have the deepest appreciation and admiration for. These are men who have taken a stand. Many of them have lost their income. They've lost their preaching jobs as a direct result of publicly espousing the view of covenant eschatology. Nonetheless, they have taken their stand. They have engaged in debates, and as a result of the debates, the truth has advanced, and they've been able to convert. Look, I don't even know how many people, but it's a lot. I do know that. And so we know that there are other numerous individuals out there on the firing line, men and women, who are putting their theological futures on the line to take a stand for the truth of God. And, when you just keep hearing and when you keep reading the testimonials of countless individuals who send us emails, who, when they order materials, send along a note of appreciation for the ministry. It's such a wonderful, such an encouraging thing. I've received personal notes such as that no less than 3 times so far this week of how our ministry, both YouTube's articles on DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, even here on Fulfilled Radio, of how these ministries have touched their lives, has given them the courage to stand up, has given them the courage to speak out, to take a stand, and to influence the hearts and the lives of others as well. So My goodness gracious. What more, what more could a person ask? In the service of the Lord, to be able to touch the hearts and the lives of countless thousands of individuals. And it brings up a point, we pointed this out, and I'll hurry along here and get back into the text of Isaiah 66 here shortly. We have pointed out how the enemies of covenant eschatology are repeatedly stating, well, these predators, they're such a tiny, tiny little band of people. Well, if we're such a tiny, tiny little band of people, why do they waste their time talking against us? Why don't they just take the view of Gamaliel in Acts chapter 5? Peter John stood on trial, and, the Sanhedrin wanted to kill him, and Gamaliel speaks up, and he said, brethren, you might ought to just be careful here what you're doing. If this work is of God, then you're going to be found to be fighting against God. If it's not of God, then guess what? It will come to nothing. So why in the world don't these guys who spend literally hour upon hour upon hour of their time on the internet, on Facebook, and on YouTube, many of them have started coming on my YouTube channel and posting really long, lengthy posts, doing nothing but deriding and condemning me, which I'm not going to take just a whole lot more of that, because so much of what they do is nothing but name-calling. It's casting aspersion on my character. They do not make exegetical arguments. It's just criticism. Well, that's not constructive. That's not biblical. And so I have warned many of them, if you're not going to offer actual biblical arguments, if all you're going to do is call me names, if all you're going to do is question my character, then no, I'm not going to allow that kind of posting. And furthermore, I'm not going to allow you to come on my YouTube and post insults of others who happen to agree with what I'm saying, call them names, question their character, question their integrity. And so I had to delete some posts the other day in which this one individual came on my YouTube channel and just insulted over and over this woman who was posting some excellent comments, asking good, solid questions, and this individual could do nothing but call her ignorant, call her a fool, and other names. And so I hope that I did not lose connection. I just had a spike here at my house. It shows that I'm still on, so very good. I hope that's correct. But my screen just went black, and then it came back on. So I hope I'm still with you, if you can hear me. But according to what I'm looking at here, I'm still with you. So anyway, it's so humbling to be able to be a part of this ministry. It's so exciting to be a part of this ministry. And I tell you what, as you know, folks, if you don't know it already, William and I have been working together since 1981. It is such a joy, it's such an honor and a privilege to work with a man of the integrity, the knowledge, the wisdom, and the understanding, and the zeal and the dedication of William Bell. So that's just simply the way I feel. All right, I want to get back into the text of Isaiah chapter 66. We are talking about the Messianic temple. And I shared with you ever so briefly last week how my friend in Israel was telling me in an email. We correspond, about every other day on the internet. But he told me that one of his sons has a view outside his window of the Temple Mount, or of the Dome of the Rock, which he said, Lord willing, the third temple will be built before long. Now, here he is expressing the Jewish hope, the Jewish expectation of a third temple. Now, I've shared with you the fact that dispensationalism is actually anticipating two more temples. One temple of the man of sin, the second temple, the Messianic temple in the millennium. Now, the Jews categorically reject that. I hope you understand that. And so it makes for a really, really strange marriage between dispensationalism, which says immediately after the rapture, the man of sin signs a peace treaty with Israel, allowing them to build a temple in Jerusalem. And as Thomas Ice says, the traditional sacrifices of Judaism are restored. He said that in his book, Prophecy Watch. But that's the man of sin temple. That's the temple that is authorized by the man of sin. Catch the power of that, folks. I mean, that's a horrid doctrine. You know, and immediately before the second coming, and this depends upon which one of the millennial writers that you read. But many of the millennial writers believe that the man of sin temple is destroyed during the Great Tribulation. And thus, at the second coming of Christ, at the height of the Great Tribulation, when Israel cries out for relief from the Lord, and Jesus descends from heaven on a cloud of heaven with the great sound of a trumpet and flaming fire, taking vengeance on those that do not know God, it is at that time that Jesus himself constructs the Messianic. Once again, the Jews reject categorically that doctrine of two future temples. And yet they gladly accept the untold millions of dollars from the dispensational world who teaches that there has to be two more temples, both of them built on the same site, ostensibly where the Dome of the Rock is now sitting. One of those temples will be an absolute abomination to God because, after all, it is sanctioned and blessed by the man of sin. I mean, how can you have a temple sanctioned by God, blessed by God, if it is sanctioned by and built by the man of sin? I mean, how would that even work? Well, nonetheless, that strange paradox, that strange partnership between dispensationalism and Judaism, in which Judaism gives countless millions of dollars to the Jews every year to advance the Zionist philosophy, the theological Zionism, as well as the political Zionism. Those two related and yet slightly distinct views, but they both are looking for mostly the same things. You know, political Zionism is made up to a great part of men and women who are actually atheists. Theological Zionism is made up of those who believe in the Lord and they believe in the Bible as they view it. So you have two different aspects of Zionism at work. But all of that said, all right, what I've been sharing with you from Isaiah chapter 66 is that the Lord condemned a future temple. Heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you will make me? And where is the place of my rest? For all of these things, heaven and earth, for all of these things were made by me, and all of those things have been made for me, says the Lord. But to this man will I look, man who is of an humble and of a contrite heart, the man who trembles at my word. Isaiah 66, 1 and 2. But then the Lord made, and this is a little bit of reiteration, but it's very, very important. Now keep in mind that at the time this is written, according to Isaiah chapter 63, verse 17 and following, the Jerusalem temple, the Solomonic temple, was lying in ruin. So this is not talking about the Solomonic temple when the Lord is condemning the temple. No. He is talking about a yet future temple, which will be the Herodian temple of the first century in all of its, quote, glory, unquote. That Herodian temple that took the temple of Zerubbabel and Haggai and Zechariah and glorified it into one of the wonders of the world. And yet it is speaking of that temple, as glorious as it was, that the Lord said, and that Stephen, remember, in Acts chapter 7 said, quoting Isaiah 66 verse 1, heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool, where's the house that you will build me? And Stephen You undoubtedly, I mean, this is conjecture, but I'm really confident of this. He opened his arms up, compassing the entirety of that magnificent edifice, saying, God does not dwell in temples made with hands. And the Jews promptly picked up stones and began to kill him. Now, that ought to tell us something. It ought to tell us something about God's attitude toward physical temples. And the Lord went ahead to say, now, I believe this not only applies to the Herodian temple of the first century, but I believe that it could also apply to any kind of a proposed man of sin temple. I believe that it could also apply to the proposed temple of dispensationalism. Because in Isaiah 66, verse 3, the Lord said, the one who kills an ox will be like one who kills a man. The one who sacrifices a lamb is like he cut off a dog's neck. In other words, those are images that convey the idea of sacrilege. Horrible sacrilege. Wait a minute, aren't you supposed to offer sacrifices? Oxen as sacrifices? Well, go back to, oh my goodness. There was another major spike. Okay. Well, sure. Okay, it says I'm still on air. Hope I am. That was another major spike. I don't know what's going on. So, I believe that Isaiah 66 in verse 3 is speaking of the Jerusalem temple. Now, there are several reasons for believing that. And apply this, therefore, to the man of sin temple in the dispensational paradigm. All right? But I believe that it applied to the Herodian temple because at the time of the Herodian temple, the priesthood was no longer a sanctioned, genealogically confirmed priesthood. You go back into the time of Antiochus Epiphanes in the 2nd century BC. And Antiochus Epiphanes had Onias IV, who is the very last of the genealogically confirmed Zadokite priests to be alive, but Antiochus Epiphanes had him killed. And by the name of Menelaus and Jason conspired together to kill him. And from that point forward, ladies and gentlemen, the temple at Jerusalem did not have a properly genealogically certified priesthood. This is one of the reasons for the establishment, according to historians, this is one of the reasons for the establishment of the Essene community out by the Dead Sea, the Qumran community. They believed that the priesthood was so corrupt that there was no way in this world that they could offer acceptable sacrifices. Maybe that's one of the reasons why Isaiah, contemplating the future temple now, remember, he cannot be talking about the Solomonic temple. That's already destroyed. He is talking about a temple that is future to him. Now, here's the thing. Okay. The temple that was rebuilt under Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, and Zechariah, they had a legitimate priesthood. A legitimate priesthood. Now, that doesn't mean that the priesthood was pure. All you got to do is look at Malachi chapter 1. And in this book of Malachi, by the way, I did an entire DVD series on the book of Malachi, and I discussed the priesthood. But one of the problems in the book of Malachi was that the priesthood, when people would bring their great sacrifice, their perfect sacrifices, the priest would take that perfect animal shove it off into a corner for themselves and sacrifice the lame, the halt, the blind, and the sick. And the Lord condemned them for that. But that doesn't mean that these priests were not genealogically confirmed Levites of the tribe of Levi and of Aaron. It didn't mean they were not Zadokites. But you see, in Isaiah 66, we're talking about a time in which sacrifice itself in a future temple would be an abomination. Now, what were the sacrifices in Malachi an abomination? Yes. Because it was the priesthood that was defiled, not because of genealogy, but because of sin. It was the priesthood and therefore the sacrifices that were defiled because the sacrifices as they were supposed to be, and that once again was the fault of the priesthood. So, in the book of Malachi, we have an abuse of the temple. That is the temple of Haggai, Zechariah, Ezra, Nehemiah. Right? That's the temple to be sure. So the Lord was rejecting those sacrifices, but then in that 2nd century BC, the pure bloodline of the priesthood was snuffed out. There were no genealogically approved, certified Levitical priests from the time of Onias IV until the time of Jesus. Because you see, when the Romans took over, and even in the time, late in the time of Antiochus, he would put the office of high priesthood up for the high bidder. I mean, to to give a really rough analogy here, he would put the priesthood to serve and offer the sacrifices and to serve in the temple at Jerusalem. He put that office up on eBay. Because you see, if you were high priest, you had control of the temple. You had control of the treasury of the temple. You had control of the temple tax. It was an office of incredible power, influence, and wealth. And so men literally bid against one another, regardless of their lineage. It didn't matter to them. And thus, in the time of Jesus, the priesthood had been utterly defiled. I'm convinced that this is one of the reasons why Jesus cleansed the temple 2 different times. Now, I understand he did not mention the priesthood in either one of those occurrences. I believe what was going on in the temple, even though part of it was legitimate, on the scale and the way it was being done was an abomination. Well, who controlled that? The priesthood, the high priest. And so the abuses that Jesus condemned in John 2 and in Matthew, the second occasion of his cleansing of the temple, on both of those occasions, when he said, "My Father's house is to be a house of prayer for all nations, but you have turned it into a den of thieves." Again, who did that? You see, the money changers couldn't do what they did without the permission and the oversight and the protection of the high priest and the entire priestly hierarchy. So we have to look at this in a comprehensive manner and to realize that the condemnation of Isaiah 66 could point directly at the Herodian temple of the 1st century, a priesthood and a temple system that had become so corrupt. As the Lord looked down through the stream of time, he said, whoever offers an ox as a sacrifice is like he murdered a man. And once again, remember, the offering of oxen, Numbers 28, Leviticus chapter 23. and other Old Testament passages, all commanded the offering of oxen as sanctified sacrifices. So it's not like an ox wasn't supposed to be offered. They were in fact part of the commanded sacrificial system. But when they were offered, if it was blind, lame, halt, sick, diseased, etc., then it wasn't acceptable. Or if it was offered by a man who was not of the tribe of Levi, then that sacrifice was, pardon me, allergies are really bad, that sacrifice an abomination. And listen, folks, since there were no genealogically confirmed priests, that meant no sacrifices that were being offered were in fact acceptable. And if you're familiar with Josephus, during the initial stages of the war, the zealots went out and found what Josephus calls a buffoon. He was a country bumpkin, but he had background in the tribe of Levi. Now listen, he was not a totally acceptable, and he had no training as a priest. He was not qualified to be a high priest. But because they wanted some semblance of appearance of proper sacrifice, they brought him in there, put him in the high priest garments. And look, you have to understand that before a high priest could serve, he had to go through this intense period of purification, this intense period of instruction. He had to go through this intense period of preparation. And Josephus literally makes fun of this country bumpkin, realizing and understanding that he was not by any stretch of the imagination qualified or prepared to offer sacrifice. But, he went through the motions, and those zealots were sort of kind of satisfied that this man could serve. But all of those abuses, I am convinced, are what leads us to understand Isaiah 66 and verse 3. Keeping in mind, once again now, Isaiah is not predicting the fall of the Solomonic temple in 586 BC. That had already happened. Isaiah is talking of a temple future to him, in which the temple was going to be defiled, in which the sacrifices would be unacceptable. We know from Malachi that was true, and from Malachi up to the period of Onias, there was a period of ebb and flow in regard to the purification and the purity of the priesthood, and then Onias was slain, murdered, literally murdered by Menelaus and Jason. And from that point forward, for over 200 years, well, give or take, the priesthood was totally unqualified, disqualified to offer righteous sacrifices. And I believe that's one of the reasons why the Lord said in Isaiah 66. Now, before I go back to that, let me point out something. Consider then, if there was no genealogically confirmed priesthood in the first century, then how can there be a genealogically confirmed priesthood in the so-called man of sin temple? And people are going to say, oh, well, the Lord's going to take care of that. Well, why didn't the Lord take care of that in the first century? Why didn't the Lord designate and appoint men genealogically confirmed, and as it were, start the genealogical confirmation on genealogical tables all over again. Why didn't the Lord reveal someone? If that's what we're told, basically that's what we're told is going to happen in the future, or they tell us, oh, well, DNA. How do we know that DNA is accurate? If that DNA goes back to the supposed Kohen tribe of the first century, Kohen name of the first century, folks, they were not genealogically confirmed. They were illegitimate priests. So my point, once again, is if the Lord was going to condemn the temple of Malachi, more specifically the priesthood there, but if he condemned the sacrifices and the priesthood in that place because of their abuse, and then we come forward to the period of Jason, Menelaus, and the slaying of Onias IV, from which point the priesthood could not be, was not genealogically confirmed. How do we know they were not genealogically confirmed? It's because they had the genealogies available in the temple, okay, but they knew that Jason and Menelaus were not qualified. So they had the tablets, genealogical tablets, to know for certain that these men and all who followed after them were not genealogically qualified to be priests and high priests. Once again, that's one of the reasons why the Essene community was established, because they knew of the horrid perversion of the priesthood in Jerusalem. Now, since there are no genealogical tablets or tables by which any man can be confirmed today, then if today they're basing their DNA upon the Kohen tribe or name of the first century, or even the 2nd century BC, guess what? Does that not indicate to us ostensible priesthood today would be based upon a distorted and perverted priesthood? Once again, back then they had the genealogical tables and they knew there were no qualified priests. They knew that. Basis, will this man of the temple be built if they're going to rely on priests that they've appointed because of DNA based upon the DNA going back for centuries to a perverted priesthood? It doesn't prove anything. And so I believe all of that. You see, I believe there was this recognition. Well, I know there was among the Essenes. I know there was among many of the righteous in the first century. You know, many of the righteous in the first century, basically, it seems, this is what it seems like, they knew that the temple leadership was corrupt. But they knew they were supposed to worship the God of their fathers. They knew they were supposed to offer the sacrifices. They knew that all they could do is what they were able to do. And that's to take their sacrifice, offer it in a true spirit of faith, offer it in a true spirit of devotion, offer it in a true spirit of love for the Father. And whatever perversion the priesthood was guilty of was beyond them. It was outside of them. But I believe that because of that perversion, there was a deep-seated understanding and knowledge, and I want you to listen to me very carefully here. I believe that there was a deep-seated understanding and knowledge that as a result of that perversion, as a result of the long, century-long abuse of the temple and the priesthood, they understood and they dreaded what was coming. Now, let me illustrate that. Beginning in AD 30, the massive, massive gates of the temple. Now, Josephus says 20 men. Can you imagine this? It took 20 men to open and to close that gate. But beginning in 30 AD, okay, that's 3 years after the Olivet Discourse. Hang on to that. In 30 AD, that gate and the gates of the temple began opening themselves every single night. Say what? Yeah. The gates of the temple began opening themselves every single night. One of the leading rabbis of the time, a Rabbi Ben Zakkai, very, very influential rabbi. Matter of fact, after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, he gained permission from the Romans to go up to Jaffa and establish there a school. And he reformulated Israel. He, instead of the altar, instead of the temple and the altar, he established prayer and repentance in its place. So anyway, those gates at the Jerusalem temple would open themselves every single night from 30 AD until, guess when? 70 AD. And Rabbi Ben Zakkai, who was witness to that, said, "O gates, why do you thus open yourself and invite your own destruction?" Now, that's a paraphrase, okay? If anyone wants the exact, precise quote, I've got it. I can provide it for you. And he quoted from the book of Zechariah, chapter 2. And what he understood was, Rabbi Ben Zakkai understood that the opening of the gates every night from 30 AD to 70 AD was a sign of the coming destruction of Jerusalem. I mean, that's stunning. And that shows us that there was in Israel, there was in Jerusalem a dread of what was coming. They knew their own temple was telling them what was coming. At least Rabbi Ben Zakkai understood that. And by the way, a little bit of a brief digression here, but it's totally relevant. Josephus likewise pointed out that the book of Daniel foretold the destruction of Jerusalem that occurred in AD 70. So you have Josephus, who was of the priestly family. You have Rabbi Ben Zakkai, one of the leading rabbis of the first century. Both of them said that the Old Covenant predicted the AD 70 destruction, and Ben Zakkai said that the temple itself foretold its own destruction by opening the gates every single night, beginning in 30 all the way until 70 AD. Well, on Facebook just recently, I was discussing Matthew 24 and Jesus' prediction that not one stone would be left standing on top of another. And the apostles' reaction to that tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And there were several former preterists on that discussion site. Men like William Vincent, Lance Conley, Sam Frost. They took the position They took the position that the apostles had no idea. They had never heard of an idea that the temple was going to be destroyed. It was a total shock to their system, something unknown, something unexpected. When I pointed out the Old Testament prophecies of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, when I pointed out that Jesus himself, in his parables in Matthew 21 and 22, when Jesus himself in Matthew 23 had predicted the destruction of Jerusalem, when I pointed out that scholars themselves, who are certainly not preterists, but when these scholars themselves point out that prior to AD 70, there were Jewish sources who predicted the AD 70 destruction, all of these former preterists scoffed at me, said I was lying to make those claims, said there were no predictions prior to AD 70 of the AD 70 destruction. Now, that tells you a little bit about the mindset. You're going to tell me that Jesus did not predict the fall of Jerusalem prior to Matthew 24? I would suggest you read Matthew 22 in the parable of the wedding and the destruction of the city of the men who are invited to the wedding, but who beat and killed the messenger sent to invite them to the wedding. They were destroyed. Their city was burned. That's not the destruction of Jerusalem. That's not Jesus predicting it before Matthew 24. And by the way, let me point this out. Dale Allison Jr., who is a very noted world-class scholar, takes note in his book, The End of the Ages Has Come, says that there were many, that's his word, many rabbinic sources prior to AD 70 that predicted the AD 70 destruction of Jerusalem. Now, be really honest, I just stumbled onto that quotation from Allison over the last few days, so I did not use it in my exchange with these predators. But, the occasion will present itself to be able to do that in the coming days. The point of fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that when Isaiah 66, the Lord said, I'm going to bring upon them what they dread, there was in Israel in the first century an awareness, a gnawing awareness that old covenant temple had to fall. Because you see, the new covenant temple, the Messianic temple, was going to be created, fully established, I should say, after the destruction of the old. So Isaiah 66, verse 4 and 5, is predicting the destruction of the old, which implies the coming of the new. And we've got a lot more to say on Isaiah chapter 66. And we probably won't get to it next week because William Bell is going to share with us his experience in Ghana, from which he has just returned. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us this evening on Two Guys on a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. With that, I'm going to say good night and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Don Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust.